Thank you, Margot. Two very different passages. And I'm not quite sure that my title this morning, Getting Beyond Observance, is maybe of the clearest of terms. Now, what I mean by observance, I'm thinking of religious observance, going to church, doing church, going through the rituals. And then getting beyond observance has to do with maybe the heart of religion and what it means to be a day-by-day follower of Jesus. Now, one of the great problems that Christianity has is a perception out there that churchgoers may not always, and some more than others, may not get the day-to-day thing right, and therefore they get marked as hypocritical. I remember attending a church once that called itself the Friendly Church. Their mantra was always that they were the welcoming, the friendly, and they loved everyone. That was until one morning, Sunday morning, into the service walked 6 young people, probably early 20s. And these 6 young people, I mean, most churches would have been really excited to have 6 young people come through their doors and sit down close to the front and go through the service. But these 6 young people were sort of interesting. As they walked through the door, the ushers handing out the programs for the service were just beyond speech. Everyone else stared at them. And during the service, continual glances over at them sitting in the pew. Because these 6 young people, they were dressed with big, heavy black boots. They were called Doc Martens in the old country. I'm not sure if they're here. They were dressed in jeans with tears in them. They were dressed with black leather jackets. And on the leather jackets and the jeans, there were chains sewn into them. They would wear nose rings and earrings, and the young ladies that were there, they were rather partial to dark, sort of blackish makeup. Looked a bit scraggly. And suddenly, this friendly church wasn't so friendly. And the welcoming church wasn't so welcoming. And people were just, before service, during service, after service, talking about these strangers that had come into their midst. Words and actions, they didn't quite mesh, and they were only friendly to people like themselves. But hypocrisy goes farther than just failing to be welcoming. I actually typed into the Google search engine the words church and hypocrisy, and the images section came up with a bunch of posters. And these are the words, I think we might be getting them up here. Sometimes the nicest people you meet are covered in tattoos and rings, and sometimes the most judgmental people you meet go to church on Sunday. Yeah, ooh. I kept reading, and another said, I find it odd that those who talk about going to church or having values are really the ones who treat others the worst. I appreciated the thought of Garrison Keillor. Anyone who thinks sitting in church can make you a saint must also think that sitting in a garage will make you a car. And then to get back on point, Brennan Manning's words, the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christian people who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him with their lifestyle. Now, a year or so ago, I don't always do this, I warned Ken about 10 minutes ago during the welcoming. No, that'd be half an hour ago. Anyway, I want to quote the Reverend Ken Norman. He wrote in the Eastminster Link last year, he was reflecting a little bit on how he would do ministry different if he was beginning today rather than in 1955. And he said this: "I would encourage a congregation to understand that the Christian faith is not so much about what one believes as it is about how one lives." And I think, among other things, Ken may have been pointing out to us that we need to bring authenticity to our Christian lives. If we say we're a welcoming church, we are a welcoming church, no matter who comes through the door. If we say we're a loving church, we are a loving church. If we say we're Christian, we are Christian, not just on Sunday mornings, but every day. And that's exactly what this passage in Isaiah is saying to us today. The passage comes to us from the post-exilic Jewish world. That means that the people have returned from captivity in Babylon, and they want to rebuild their holy city, but that's on hold for political reasons, and they're frustrated. And life was not as easy as they thought when they came back from Babylon to Jerusalem. It's tough. And things aren't going well economically and otherwise, and they don't know why. And they're going to the synagogue, and they're fasting, and they're following the outer observances of their religion, but God doesn't seem to be answering them. God doesn't seem to be hearing their prayers, and they don't know why things aren't going well. And then the prophet steps in. And he tells them that godly religion isn't just about doing the rituals. It's not just about going to synagogue, not just about fasting. And the Lord isn't listening because you're not honoring God with the totality of your lives. While fasting, you're exploiting workers, you're quarreling. Around you is injustice, intolerance, oppression, poverty, and you're not doing anything about it. And here's the word from the Lord: "Is not the kind of fasting I have chosen to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and not turn away from your own flesh and blood." And so the prophet's saying, you've got to bring your lives into line with God. It's not just about fasting and those observances. You need to get beyond those and bring your life into tune with it. And then God's going to hear you. Then the holy city will be rebuilt. And he says, your light will break forth like the dawn. Your righteousness will go before you. The glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. And then you will call, and the Lord will answer. So I think Reverend Norman is right. Godly religion, it has a lot to do with how we live. Well, this passage in Isaiah chapter 58, it's a great passage. And it is a really great passage for United Church people and the United Church. You know, the United Church was born of denominations that heard this kind of call from God and tried to live it, seeking justice, trying to overcome oppression, looking after the poor. And if we go back in history, the Methodists and the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists of the late 19th century, they were just in the forefront of what was called a social gospel movement. And they established some great mission agencies and engaged in all manner of things to work and help the poor and the afflicted. And as those churches united, the United Church took up the torch. And just before it was born in 1925, there was this feeling that because the United Church was such a great church, made up over 20% of the population of Canada, that they could really Christianize the whole social order of Canada, make it a truly Christian country, and a place where it was full of faith and care for all people. Now that was a wonderful and heady time for the church. But I'm not sure when it happened, but something has happened in the life of the church. And this is an observation more from my experience in urban churches, urban United churches. So not necessarily Belleville. Haven't quite found out what occurs here yet, but the church, it seemed, moved from gospel to a social gospel, and then to, dare I say, social? It moved beyond observance and just doing church into an active and socially progressive body that helps so many people, and then somewhere along the line, that social aspect continued, but the foundation, faith element, got lost in some places. One of my former parishioners, a great guy, he was a great help in many things and keenly interested in social justice issues and the types of things Isaiah mentioned, overcoming oppression, helping others. And he attends church quite regularly, has done many things. He's been involved with our refugee program, been involved with food bank, been involved with out of the cold programs, all of that sort of thing. And most caring man. Well, one day he came into my office after he had delivered some clothing to a needy family, and I asked him, I said, did you say anything about where the clothes are coming from? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, did you indicate that you're bringing those from the church, or you're doing this because you're a Christian or something like that? And he said, well, no, am I supposed to? And we knew each other well, so I pushed him a little bit, and I said, well, the church, it's struggling. We've lost so many people, the membership's declining, and we need to advertise ourselves a little better. And at least let people know why we're doing these things. That we're doing it because Jesus, for instance, taught us to love. He says, I don't really believe in that stuff anymore. I just do this because it's right. And I paused for a moment and wondered how many others in the congregation are like that. And as time went on, I found it was quite a number. And as time went on, I found that our congregation wasn't alone in the city. And then I look at a passage like this from Isaiah, and I think, this isn't what the prophet would have wanted at all. He didn't just want us to live better. Didn't just want us to go out and do all these good things, but he wanted our faith and life to come together into an authentic whole. And I think this is one of the reasons, perhaps, that many congregations in the mainline churches have declined over the last 50 or 60 years. Why many of our sons and daughters are not coming. It's because we've continued doing stuff but lost the foundation. Set some of that aside or adjusted it until it was nothing. And in a way, it's like moving back to a different kind of observance, a different kind of ritual, and we need to get beyond that ritual of doing things and rediscover that faith that gave birth to those things. Sometimes I wonder if we stand for anything. And sometimes I think then people just wonder what's the point. And why bother going to church when you can do the same thing in the Rotary, or you can do the same thing with the Cancer Society. And while those things may be good, the prophet would never have approved for God's people doing things at the expense of faith. And what he encouraged, I think, was the people of God to follow God with the totality of their lives. Faith and life coming together. And so how we live our lives is important. What we believe is important. I don't know if you've ever watched the 1981 film that won the Academy Award Best Picture that year. A low-budget film, but still won. But there's something comes through in that film, and the way Eric Liddell led his life and how he understood faith and life. Liddell was born in 1902, and he was born to missionary parents in China. They sent him back to the homeland for boarding school and university. And when he was at the University of Edinburgh, his athletic prowess was noticed. And he was deeply, deeply passionate about running. But he loved God. And he loved God even more than running. And there was a beautiful scene in the picture where his sister is beginning to doubt that he loves God, that thinks that he loves running more. And she questions him about it, about his passion for God. And he says, well, I believe God has made me for a purpose, to go back to China. But he has also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. It's not just fun. To win is to honor God. And Liddell was nicknamed the Flying Scot. And with his talent, he won gold at the 1924 Olympics in Paris. His main event, in the part of that story, his main event was the 100 meters. And as it turned out, one of the heats for the 100 meters was to be run on a Sunday morning, the Sabbath. And when he found out about it, Liddell said, I'm not running on the Sabbath day. And there were people who came in and tried to encourage him to do other things. And the whole British Olympic Committee came in and started talking to him. The Prince of Wales was in Paris. The Prince of Wales came in and started talking to him. But he stood firm. The Sabbath is a Sabbath is a Sabbath. Well, because he was so fast, one of his teammates, Lindsay, who had already won a silver medal, suggested that Liddell, well, he couldn't run in the 100, so why don't you run in the 400 and take my spot in the 400? I can't imagine that happening today with athletes. And so Liddell took his place in the 400. Wasn't his event, though. He wasn't trained for that. He didn't have the experience for that race. But just before the race began, one of the American team came up to him and handed him a little note. And on that note was inscribed the words of 1 Samuel 2:30, those who honor me, I will honor. Those who honor me, I will honor. And Liddell, because he didn't have experience in that race, he started out of the blocks too fast. He was whipping by everybody around the first bend, down the stretch, around the next bend. And at that point, it seemed like his energy was spent, perhaps too soon. But then his sort of trademark motion came into play, and he threw his head back. Some extra energy came from somewhere, and he went on to claim victory. Those who honor me, I will honor. And the suggestion was in the film that it was God who gave Liddell that extra energy that day. His faith, you see, and his life were so intertwined. Now, we may not see running on the Sabbath day as a problem today, but the thought is there. God honors consistency, where faith and life come together. And God wants to see us living lives seeking justice and freedom for the oppressed and making provision for those in need. But the Lord also wants us to love God, to love Him, to hear the gospel, to proclaim Christ. And so Isaiah might be pointing out to us today, to some of us, saying, maybe your religion is too centered on observance, doing church, Sundays. We need to focus on being the church and being that all week long. And for others, God may be saying here that our religion is too focused on doing things. And while we do great things and good things, we need to remember also the faith that lies behind those good things, the faith that leads to salvation that Paul said in the other passage that was read today. And we need to bring these together so that our faith, our life, these things operate together in an authentic way, an authentic Christianity. Let us pray.